Hello and welcome to the first ever episode of Rising Earth News. I'm Lauren, and here at Rising Earth, we're telling the amazing stories from individuals, businesses and communities from around the world that are helping to shape the future of sustainable living. So join us in being a part of the age of restoration as we ask you to look beyond the COVID-19 lockdown to build back better. Coming up today, how can you contribute to a more sustainable food system? Why are students demanding that climate change be at the forefront of their education? How is COVID-19 showing us the importance of human connection? And what role can the imagination play in tackling climate change? First, over to Jyoti Fernandez, who founded the Land Workers Alliance, a union of farmers, foresters, growers and land-based workers that aims to create a globally sustainable agricultural system, one which seeks to feed the planet without destroying it. Jyoti is also a coordinator for La Via Campesina, representing 200 million agricultural workers from peasant farms from around the world.
So what actually is a peasant farm?
You know, they're small scale, they farm using the resources around them. They kind of recycle the nutrients and things that are going on their farm and use those resources in a really sustainable way to feed their local communities, sell to local markets. And that's like a really sustainable form of agriculture that people are very proud of, you know, because it's rooted in so much knowledge and tradition and skill. You know, 70% of the food that feeds people, not the bulk calories just churned out by industrial agriculture, actually comes from peasant farms. So, you know, we're really at the forefront of feeding the planet through small farms. You know, here in the UK, because we've moved into an industrial farming system largely, where the way people buy food is really dominated by supermarkets. If you break it down, 30% of our emissions come from our food system. 30%, yeah. And I can roughly break that down. 10% can be contributed to land use change. What that means is land in other places, particularly like where the Amazon rainforest is, for example, they grow crops on area that used to be forest. Here in the UK, we import loads of that crop, you know, which is a lot of it's soya, which goes into animal feeds. And a lot of it's stuff like palm oil, and then also a certain amount of it's biofuels and some sugar as well. And these are imported into the UK and imported into European countries, and that land should actually be forest. Another 10% comes from the direct emissions from, you know, the tractors, from when you plow. If you use artificial fertilizer, like it's called nitrate fertilizer, a lot of that evaporates up into the air, and that contributes to climate change. And then the other 10% comes from the amount of transport and refrigeration and everything that's used for our food system. The more you can get back to your local stuff that doesn't have to be transported for, that's not packaged up, that's seasonal, you know, all of it is a direct solution to climate change. And if it's organic, you're stopping those artificial nitrate fertilizers, you're stopping those practices, you know, that cause so much of a contribution to climate change. And if you're getting away from eating meats that are using soya-based feed, you know, if you go for pasture-fed livestock, then it's really also helping contribute to a solution to climate change.
Is there anything else that you would recommend that people can do? Or
Land Workers Alliance is running a campaign right now. We call it our Land Army campaign, to try and get the support that producers need right now. You know, the producers that are really facing an emergency in terms of they might go bust because they've lost their markets that they supply to, and they need to transition to doing deliveries or whatever it is to stay afloat. They need a little bit of financial support from the government. So we think, you know, that £10,000 that's been offered as small business relief should be available to those businesses so that they can transition and make the changes they need to survive. And then we are also trying to get government to open up a community resilience fund that helps support these community supported agriculture projects starting, and also any new entrants that are ready to go, gives them the financial support and the logistical support they need to get going, whether it's land, training, whatever it is. There's a campaign we got online. You can go to change.org and sign the petition there, and then stay in touch with what we're doing with that. You know, I'm talking to politicians and, you know, people within our agricultural ministries and government to try and recognize this. Now, over the long term, if you kind of join with our movement with Land Workers Alliance and all the people who support a better food system, we need people always saying to MPs or saying to their local politicians, we don't want these pesticides. We don't want, you know, agriculture that's destroying destroying the climate and, you know, basically destroying the ability of future generations to feed themselves. Let's work and put some time into building a better food system, and that takes investment.
Up next, Lily's been hearing from 17-year-old Joe Brindle, founder of the Teach the Future campaign, who believes that the current education systems need to change in order to reflect the urgency of the current climate crisis.
If you could just tell us a bit about what the Teach the Future campaign is.
We're students, like everyone on the campaign is students, and we've recognised that currently the education system that we're going through doesn't adequately prepare us for the topic of climate change. I mean, the purpose of education is like to prepare us for our futures, and for my generation and the generations to come. Those are going to be futures really greatly affected by climate change, and therefore our education needs to prepare us for that. We recognise that climate change isn't talked about well, so one of the key things we want the government to introduce a review into the current climate emergency learning entitlements. Basically, to what degree should students learn about climate change, and how well is that being fulfilled currently? I mean, we did a survey, and about 4% of students feel they know a lot about climate change, and really that number should be something like 98% or something, so that's just a real big issue. Additionally, we think that teachers should be trained to teach about climate change and sustainability. Once again, the survey found that 68% of teachers want to teach more about climate change, where 75% don't feel they have the adequate training to teach on the topic. We've talked to the government and the Department for Education about this. Their classic response is just that teachers have the freedom to teach about it if they want, so therefore it's not really a problem. But the thing is, it's clear that teachers don't have that freedom because they don't actually have the necessary skills to teach about it.
What is it that Teach the Future campaign is asking of the education system?
Final demand, or our final ask, is this Climate Emergency Education Act, which is a bill that we've written as students, the first education bill ever written by students, and it sets out a bunch of things that would massively change the education system, sets an expectation on all schools to teach about climate change. It provides funding for youth-led campaigning, and it also provides funding and creates a necessity for all schools to be net zero by 2030, which is really important as part of the government's current plan for net zero by 2050.
So I know you're also involved in UK SCN, aren't you? So if you could tell us a bit about what that is and how people can get behind that as well.
Yeah, so we're a large group of mostly under 18s spread across the country. We're split into regional groups as well as kind of a national organising team, striking since February last year, mostly every month. We had a huge strike in September. We got adults and young people involved, and it was like the part of this globally the largest climate mobilisation ever in history, and it was amazing that us young people were able to organise something so big and powerful. And yeah, we've been organising behind this thing called the Green New Deal, which is basically it's kind of set of principles or a policy plan to create a much greener and fairer society.
How does it make you feel when, you know, the governments and the authorities start to actually listen to you? It must be, you know, quite hopeful and really feel like you're making that change.
There's definitely been times I felt really hopeful. I think you recognise that climate change is a really scary topic, but the fact is that young people are going to find out about it either way. Like, we have our phones and all that kind of thing, and social media, it's all over the place, so it's unavoidable. But the thing about the internet is it's also covered in either difficult to understand facts or in often like lies. So I think it's important that climate change is taught about in a sensitive and truthful way, and that's why education is much more important than just doing a bit of research, because it's a difficult topic to do research on. That's coming from someone who's done it. And so, like, if you're an 8-year-old and you're finding out about climate change, it's much better that it comes from a knowledgeable teacher who can teach about it in a way which doesn't scare you, rather than it comes from some really daunting Facebook page or something.
Yeah, and how do you think it is that you do teach in a way that kind of doesn't scare people? Because there's a new, like, really big phenomena of eco-anxiety, especially in young people.
One of the key parts of this bill we've written is particularly funding into the research and specific allocation to the teachers can be trained to teach about it in a way that is sensitive, and so that kind of like the best ways to teach about it sensitively can be found. I know that the Climate Psychology Alliance are working on it a lot, and they've sponsored Teach the Future, they've supported it, so it shows that kind of like psychologists who know a lot about this, and specifically focusing on climate anxiety, recognise that climate education is actually really important.
Could you tell us a bit about why you think it's so important that this campaign is youth-led?
I think we recognise as young people that like climate change is going to affect us much more, like and future generations to come, and I don't think it should be our responsibility, but the responsibility is kind of falling on us because of the lack of action from previous generations. And so, yeah.
Personally, I mean, it's just an opinion really, but I think the way that I found as a way to kind of combat my own eco-anxiety, which I was suffering with, was to focus on kind of activism or looking at the solutions. It's kind of given me the hope to keep going and to believe that we can kind of turn this all around before, that global warming becomes unbearable, kind of. Is there anything that you would like to say to teachers or students about how they can use this time as an opportunity to kind of educate maybe themselves more about climate education?
There are loads of really great resources online. We considered as Teach the Future to make our own resources, but we've realised there's actually loads of great things. I think the United Nations Education, it's UNEP, and I can't remember what the P stands for, but they've got some great resources at the moment, and they're kind of doing like a homeschool climate change lesson series, which is really great. I think if you're able to sign up to to the mailing list on our website at teachthefuture.uk, then like every so often we'll definitely have some kind of call to action where we really need some help from our supporters.
Yeah, that's amazing. And yeah, I think your answers were really, really interesting. So thank you so much for talking to me about that.
And now Howard Johns is in conversation with Sal Glen Corelli, founder of the Helpers Mentoring Society. And they'll be looking at how the Western world can incorporate the holistic view of Indigenous people's respect for nature into our society, and how we can treat this pandemic as an opportunity to restart society on a greener, more ecologically respectful footing.
We're in multiple crises, the climate crisis is here, the COVID crisis, that society is basically being reinvented. What needs to be at the heart of that reinvention?
So we've been saying this for years, this comes from many Indigenous cultures that have sustained themselves for millennia. Some of these wisdoms come from the oldest cultures known to exist continuously, and have made sure people have lived in balance with nature. What they would say, and I'll say it for them, and I'll say it for myself as well, is that humanity needs to take its responsibility with nature. We all live in this house. We're a big family, and for one family member to essentially destroy that house is incredibly disrespectful. It's very irresponsible. And even COVID-19 as one of those repercussions. I personally believe in the wisdom of these Indigenous cultures. We take our responsibility and not try to pass the buck. We can take care of these things. We can do that through recognizing our interconnectedness, through recognizing our collective response even to COVID-19. It shows that power that we have to make these collective decisions so that change can actually take place. Humanity's relationship to nature and our responsibility with nature has to take a priority. If we, as a small percentage, makes the choice to take that responsibility, but the majority doesn't, then we're still going to be impacted by it. If one nation says yes, but the other nation says no, then there will still be an imbalance that will take place. It needs to be reinvented from a place of understanding interconnectedness. And I think this is really where the younger people that really have that consciousness in a different way, we grew up with technology that supports that consciousness, but it's also innate within us. And that's different than, this older generation who's saying separate, build walls. But we could shift the way that we think about these things, and that would shift how we're actually dealing with the situation at hand. And the last thing that I could say about this is reprioritizing education to reinforce and create connection. It's got to focus on relationship. What it has been shown time and time again is that human beings are designed to connect, that our whole systems are pre-wired to actually have these interpersonal relationships with each other, ourselves, the natural world. If that isn't supported as a priority, then we're going to have people that are not integrated. There's been some really incredible studies just recently about neurobiology and how even the idea of morality is linked to our ability and experiences that led us to connection, into the sense of interconnectedness. So what these studies essentially say is that you can be technically intelligent, but be very disconnected and then not be a very quote unquote good person, like moralistically good. Morals are not so much about, education in the way of teaching somebody what is more moralistic. It's not even about society. Morals are directly related to how well do you feel like you are relating to the world and yourself. The teachings of this lineage would say that based upon your level of awareness and connection with the world that you live in and yourself and the people that you're around, that you will display certain traits, certain characteristics that would historically be identified as leadership qualities. But everybody has this potential to develop these characteristics that would make you observable to be a healthy and happy human being. And it all ties back to connection.
Next, we're hearing from Rob Hopkins, author, environmentalist, and co-founder of the Transition Network, a global movement of communities who are choosing to come together to reimagine and rebuild our world sustainably. This is a subject which Rob delves into deeper in his most recent book, From What If to What Is. Lily reports.
In your book that you've written, you talk about the importance of imagination. So the importance that we can imagine a sustainable future before we then go and create it. So could you tell us a little bit more about the importance of imagination, and especially at this moment?
I wrote a book called From What Is to What If, which came out late last year. And the book, it asks lots of different what if questions. What if we had an education system that fired young people's imaginations? What if we were really good at asking what if questions? I did over 100 interviews and went to lots of really interesting projects. And I hope that it is a really useful contribution to now, actually, because if ever there was a time that invited us to imagine and ask what's next, it's now. This is that time. So I would say the first thing in the immediate nature now of the crisis we're in is we need each other. This is really a pretty easy test of what climate change will be like. Now, this is nothing in comparison to a 2.5, 3 degree rise in climate temperature. We're not in the middle of famines and food shortages and food rationing, and we will be unless we're able to really drastically change things. The climate movement has been saying for years is actually, if we're to have any hope of staying below 1.5 degrees, that will require cuts of like 8, 9, 10% a year starting right now. That means we need to completely reimagine how the transport system works. We need to get cars off the streets. That means we need to bring food production much closer to home. It means a more just society where there is nobody who doesn't have a bed for the night. It's where we have a health service that is properly funded and all that kind of stuff. All that stuff we've been told for years that we're completely naive dreamers and that's never going to happen. And actually, what we've seen in the last 2 or 3 weeks is all of a sudden that stuff just changed like that. We can ground 95% of the world's flights and things kind of still go on. Nothing is impossible. Actually, if we choose to say this is a crisis, we need to throw everything at this. This can happen. All of this stuff can happen. Nobody's going to buy that myth anymore that actually things don't change. Change doesn't happen. Oh, we'll do that next year. Oh, well, that'll happen later. It's like, actually, we could do this. We could do everything that a 1.5 degree world demands of us. And actually, it could really be the way out of this. So I would say that during this time of lockdown, a few things that you can do that would be really, really great. One of them, which I would say, would be to read From What Is to What If, because I think there's some great ideas in there that you'll find really useful. The main thing that I would say, actually, beyond being of best service to the people around you during this time, is to seek out and fill your head with as many possibilities of what change might look like. So use this time to give yourself an hour a day to seek out great stories around food and energy and housing. Fill yourself up with those possibilities. And then when this is over and we go back out into the world, you'll be one of those people who can say, but actually, we could do this, we could do that, we could do this.
Well, that is very interesting because that's exactly what we are doing here at Rising Earth, telling those stories. So people
or subscribe to this, subscribe here.
Our time in lockdown has resulted in some good news for our planet, one of those being the surge of output from renewable energy. Claire Nazir brings you our renewable weather report.
So, for a quick update on where our energy has been coming from in the UK, I'm excited to announce that renewable energy has been our main source of power for the whole of the first quarter this year. This means that just under 45% of electricity came from naturally powered sources like solar PV, wind and biomass, beating one of the cheapest sources of energy, natural gas, which supplied around 30% of our electricity last quarter. In the US, during the first quarter of 2020, more power was produced by solar, wind and hydro sources than by coal for the first time ever. We're also set for another great quarter, already smashing records set last year, with our longest period without coal on the grid ever. We've had over 18 consecutive coal-free days, already exceeding last year's record, which wasn't set until much later on in the year, in June. The government have set a target to completely phase out electricity generation from coal by 2024, but National Grid thinks we're likely to end our coal use even earlier, in 2022. April's clear skies and strong sunshine also helped us beat another record in the past few weeks. On Monday the 20th of April, solar power generation hit an all-time high. This is despite what was expected to be a rough year for solar power after subsidies were cut last year. But just over 9.8 gigawatts of power were generated in the middle of the day on Monday, meeting a whopping 30% of the UK's electricity needs. We're also expected to see more rooftops and fields covered in solar over the coming months as the costs of battery storage, which complements the technology, come down despite there being no subsidies. In news on heat, which accounts for one of the largest proportions of greenhouse gas emissions, plans are being formed to turn abandoned coal mines in the northeast of England into renewable projects that will harness geothermal energy to heat buildings. South Tyneside Council said its cabinet would be asked to approve the appointment of a main designer for the project, which will draw geothermal energy from flooded mines at the old Hebburn Colliery near Newcastle. And finally, on transport news, the coronavirus outbreak has brought Britain to a near standstill, with road travel plummeting to levels not seen since 1955. We're beginning to see people switching away from car, van and bus journeys, while cyclist numbers have started to increase in the past few weeks. A number of cities around the world have seen vast improvements in their air pollution levels, with smogs being lifted to reveal amazing city views. In response to the COVID crisis, many countries are announcing measures to support cycling, with the UK announcing a multi-billion-pound package of support. Hopefully, we'll have much more healthy and cycle-friendly cities moving forward. That's all from Rising Earth Renewables. I'll be back again soon. Now over to Linny and Lauren.
So today we have heard from 4 amazing individuals about how you can get involved in living more sustainably. But just to break it down, here are some of the key things that you can start doing right now. Start growing your own food. Useful resources for first-time growers are available in the description box. Support local farmers, switch to food boxes, see if they need help in distribution, and be a conscious consumer by avoiding that plastic packaging and checking out where your food really comes from. Check out the Teach the Future bill online and use the online resources available to you to educate yourself on climate change. Check out helpersmentoringsociety.net. Go outside, look around you, and realise the interconnectedness between humans and nature. We need to love and appreciate our Earth and each other during these unprecedented times. Tap into your imagination to rethink how you can build back better on the other side of lockdown. Share these ideas with your community and make them happen. Check if there's a transition town near you. If yes, join it. If not, why not start your own using the resources provided on the website? One last thing you can get behind this week is the No Big Oil Bailout campaign. A signature on this means you are supporting the investment into renewable energy instead of the exploitation of our planet's natural resources. And let us know what other local or international campaigns we can get behind. We hope you have enjoyed your first ever dose of Rising Earth news. Subscribe to our channel for more eco news and to watch the full interviews which will be released over the next 2 weeks. We'd love to hear about how you are helping to create a more sustainable world during your time in lockdown. So tweet, Instagram or Facebook us at Rising Earth News and leave us a comment below. Stay safe, stay green, and be a part of the age of restoration.